Welcome. My name is Allison Merker Garner, and I am the creator of Musical Minds. In this video, we're going to talk about regulation. What is regulation? Regulation is a word that we're hearing a lot more of now in the context of discipline, of young children in particular. The regulation is something that is applicable to all of us. So a little bit of background on this. Why do we want to be regulated? Why do we want to stay present and centered and fully available to the world around us in a calm and responsive way? Regulation is something that we desire and need to be able to grow, to be able to learn effectively, to be able to reach our highest potential. Regulation is something that can be difficult to find. We may get triggered, and I have a video on triggers. We may get triggered by something someone says or an event, and our energy goes outside of us immediately. We lose it toward this thing that is happening that we're identifying with, and it's draining. So here's an example of that. Suppose you're a teacher and you have 10 students in a given day, and each student comes in with their own issues, their own state of being, and each parent accompanying that child has their own state of being that they're bringing into the studio with you. You yourself have your own state of being that you're sharing into the space. This kind of energy is not something we see, of course, but we are very affected by it. We're hugely affected by it. We have in our neural makeup, in our brains, we have what we call mirror neurons. And mirror neurons were discovered in the 1990s by Italian scientists working with monkeys. And they discovered two things about mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are how we best learn. So mirror neurons are what they sound like. We mirror or we imitate what we see. Think of the Suzuki method of learning music. So much of that work at the very beginning is modeling. It is a teacher demonstrating and the child playing back what is heard, what is seen, what is observed. That is not rote learning. That is activating all different parts of the brain in the way we learn best. So that's one aspect of mirror neurons that's important to know. The other part of mirror neurons that's important to know is we're empathetic. It's an empathetic response. So for example, if you're a violinist and you go hear a violinist play, you're not inactive. You are recreating your experience of playing the instrument as you're watching. That's an empathetic response. That's why you can come out of a performance feeling really rejuvenated or really exhausted, because you're empathetically responding to what you see, hear, and what you know is your experience of doing it. You actually are practicing. You're actually performing. Maybe not physically, but neurologically you are. So those two things about mirror neurons are important when we're talking about regulation, because in regulation, We're responding as much to what's going on around us as we are what's going on inside us. So if you go into your teaching with 10 students in a day, and you're going into your teaching worried about that argument you had with your significant other, what do you think that's doing to your energy? What do you think is happening to you and you're emitting? And your students and your students' parents are picking up on unconsciously from you. They may not know that you had an argument with your husband, but they will pick up on the fact, consciously or unconsciously, that you're not quite available. You're not quite there for them. And what does that do to us when we feel like we're not seen and heard? We tend to push for what it is we need. I need a makeup lesson. I need your attention. I need more from you, right? The very thing we're not able to give at that moment. And then we get exhausted. Now, those of us that are creatives, teachers, or healers, we're very tuned into energy, whether we know it or not. We do mirror it. We do reflect it. We do absorb it. And there are ways to be sensitive to energy, your own and other people's, without letting it deplete you. And that is called regulation. So we're going to do some things today, and I'm going to show you some things today to think about when you sense yourself getting dysregulated, feeling depleted or distracted or overexcited, anything that's not quite normal. And we're going to define normal as well in two different ways. And you can use the way that's most meaningful to you. One word about children, and this is not for this video, but I should do a video on this. Young children do not have the capacity to self-regulate. If you teach 2, 3, 4-year-olds, they have no clue what's going on with them. They just react. Their neural systems react and they go with it, right? They don't have the capacity yet to truly have the self-control we often expect them to have. And so I will say, if you are a teacher and you work with young children, if you discover that you have a child that's undisciplined, seems to be all over the place, doesn't focus, is unable to be responsive, watch what they do. Instead of trying to get them to do something, step back and watch them for a minute. You'll find, chances are, they're doing self-comforting, self-soothing activities. They're doing something familiar to them that kind of shuts you out, and they can, like play with that puzzle or play with their doll. They may be orienting. They may be going around the room and opening closets and doors, and your boundaries are really getting violated, right? And you're getting activated. But what they're doing is they're orienting themselves into your space to feel comfortable. I'm not saying it's allowed. I'm not saying that you should just give up all of your needs, but understanding that you can work with it. You can say, do you want to see what's in this drawer? Let's see what's in this drawer. Do you want to know where the door is that you can come in and out of when you come to lesson? Look out the window. If there are areas you don't want them to get into, tell them, because they're trying to define for themselves what's safe. And they're looking to you to create that definition for them. So if you give them a boundary and say, that closet is off limits, it's just for my hands, that is a boundary for them, and they can feel safe knowing that they are not expected to go in there. I had one child, this happened to me once. He was 4, but he was putting everything in his mouth. Talk about infantile behavior. Isn't that what a baby does? When a baby is trying to understand its world, it goes through an oral phase. Everything goes into the mouth. This is not intended to be triggering for you. It's not intended to make your life hard, though it can. It really can. But understanding that, and understanding that they look to you to help them regulate, give them those boundaries, help them feel safe in that environment. That's a whole different topic, but just a word on that. So I'm going to focus on the regulation of ourselves in specific situations, right? And we have them come up in teaching. We also have them come up as human beings, don't we? If we're in a conversation with someone, or we're trying to negotiate or reach an agreement with somebody, a colleague or an employer, or if we're working with our children and raising children and wanting to give them parameters in which to live to keep them safe, right? But we have the understanding of ourselves and of them that safety is really important. So let's get into some definitions. The first thing I'm going to show you here in screen share is from my own work. This is called Steps Toward Integration. And I could spend a whole hour on this, and I won't. But all I want you to get out of this is the process by which we regulate. It involves integration. Dr. Daniel Siegel talks a lot about integration, all of our ways of being aligned with one another. And it starts with curiosity. So when you have that kid that comes in and puts everything in their mouths, instead of immediately going to your triggered response, you step back and you get curious. What's going on with this kid? And how can I address that need? Not the resulting behavior that I don't like. And then in that curiosity, we become aware and attuned to it, right? And we give our attention to that root cause. Oh, well, maybe they're feeling uncomfortable in a new space. And so I have the intention at that point of creating more safety in that space for them. If you are a teacher or a parent, I do recommend Dan Siegel's books. They're easy to read, they're very accessible, and they're extremely cogent. They're very, very practical, but he tells you very easy and accessible ways that you can deal with certain situations like discipline. All right, so here's the next thing that I want to show you. And this comes from my work as well. It's called the ACE of self-presence. So what is our ideal state? Our ideal state is self-presence. What does that mean? It means that when we are fully present, we are available in our whole house and what goes on around us. So we're aware. We're accepting of what comes to us. We accept maybe not what it is, but that it is. We don't resist reality. We see it. We attune to that reality, and we are giving our attention toward it. So parts of the steps of integration, isn't it? So when we regulate, when we're well regulated, we're self-present. That is our ideal state. Can we always have that? No. We're always moving toward it or away from it. And your growing awareness of what it is for you and what that experience is for you is good information, because all the mindset exercises and the things I do in other videos to create a calming space, that's giving you information as to what your state of being is when you're present. So you know when you're not. If you're triggered or you become dysregulated in some other capacity, you recognize it right away. And you recognize it as not being who you are. You're not defined by that. It's just visiting. And you have the agency to shift it in a direction of more regulation or less. Why is regulation so important? As I said, we learn best that way. We cannot access, that's the word I'm trying to look for, we can't access flow and the height of creativity if we're dysregulated. So as creative beings, as artists and teachers, parents, we must be able to self-regulate, because that's what we depend upon for our functioning and what we do and who we are. So here's something from Dan Siegel again called the window of tolerance. The window of tolerance is a graph. It's a way of thinking about your state of being. Another thing that we could look at comes from polyvagal theory and Steve Porges' work. Deb Dana, who is a social worker, collated and organized and created a clinical practice based on Steve Porges' work on polyvagal theory. This is really the same thing. So we'll look at both of these. One may resonate with you more than the other. So here's the window of tolerance. Here's our self-presence right here in the middle. This line is what we are like during the day, right? We're never staying the same anywhere. We're up and down. And the green and the blue below the window of tolerance are our states of being where we feel unmotivated. We may feel stuck. We may feel like we can't mobilize to get anything done, right? That's the covers over the head kind of response. It's like a freeze state or a faint state or just a disassociated state, right? Down here. That's not ideal, is it? Any more than these orange and red boxes or rectangles are, where we're escalated. In other words, we're feeling more energy and more response than we maybe could be using. So when we get in this state of the hyperarousal, we are feeling unsafe, and we react to it by getting highly, highly, highly limited in our thinking and reactive, emotionally reactive, right? Down here, we don't feel safe, so we shut down. Now, I'm going to show you one other graphic that does come out of polyvagal theory. And it's called the polyvagal ladder. So this is referring to our nervous system response. Now, remember what we just looked at, right? We looked at all the blue and green down here. Do you remember the immobilization? And then our tolerance, our window of tolerance in here. Not in the middle, like the window of tolerance. This is how our nervous system functions. So the window of tolerance is a good graphic for us to understand if we're activated or underactivated, right? But this is actually how the nervous system shifts. So is organized differently. When we are immobilized, we're down there at the bottom of the ladder. We can't hop up to ventral vagal. We have to go through mobilization. We have to go through the sympathetic response. Can go straight into ventral vagal. We don't have to go down to dorsal first. We can go from being angry to calm. So there, unless we mobilize. So what does that mean? Well, dorsal vagal circuitry is very responsive. It's not cognitively triggered at all. We just react. So in a dorsal vagal state, we don't feel like we can do anything. We can't get out of bed. The only way we can get up to a self-present state is to start moving, get out of bed. And we start moving around, and we may not get all the way up to sympathetic, but we're moving that way. Brush your teeth, get something to eat, get moving, right? And then we can, from there, reach a state of balance and self-presence. Sympathetic circuitry is different than the dorsal vagal in that it is related to the mammalian brain. That's the limbic area, things like movement and memory and things like that. Sympathetic. And the sympathetic system involves all sorts of emotions, not just the negative ones. So we can be excited. We can be anticipatory. We can be really joyful. And we're in a sympathetic system state. That's not bad, right? That's not a bad thing. It gets bad if our attention narrows down to a point where we're not aware of ourselves or our environment. That's the only time it can be bad. And that's really when we get up here to the ventral vagal. We have to have a balance, right? The ventral vagal circuitry is related to, well, actually the sympathetic is related to the heart and the lungs, the limbs, right? If you are fearing for your life, you want to be able to run away from the danger. So your limbs are going to feel it. This is where we often can feel it in performance anxiety, where we just want to get out of there and we're shaking and our breathing increases and our heart rate increases. Our thoughts get all jumbled. That's a sympathetic response. If we go into ventral vagal from sympathetic, what do? we start to connect with people. Now, this is really important because it sounds counterintuitive. When we go into a ventral vagal state, we get there by connecting ourselves with our environment. When we're in a sympathetic state, we're thinking about ourselves. When we're in a dorsal vagal state, we're thinking about ourselves. When we get into a ventral vagal state, we're thinking about ourselves in the context of the universe. So what does that tell us? What does that mean? What Steve Porges refers to in polyvagal theory is the social engagement system. That's that mirror neuron area that I spoke about earlier. When that area where we're most empathetic and most able to receive information and integrate it, that's our best state of being. That's our self-presence. So how does that play out? If we're in a sympathetic state and we're so nervous we can't stand it, turn to the person next to you and start a conversation. Or look at somebody else and see what's going on with them. Or look out to the audience and realize that they are part of this experience with you, and they are not there to have a terrible time or to judge you, right? You're bringing your awareness outward when you go into ventral vagal. Similarly, if you're down in dorsal vagal and you're shut down, you've got to activate yourself to sympathetic to be able to get as far as that. Sorry, my phone is going. You have to be able to mobilize to get talking to someone or interacting with your environment in some way. One of the best ways to get into ventral vagal is to pet a cat or a dog. That's a wonderful way of safely getting into your environment. So that illustrates what we want to do when we regulate. We want to be in that window of tolerance or that ventral vagal state. And the ways we do that are somatic. What does that mean? Our somatic responses to our environment and to ourselves show up in our body. So the way we move, the gestures we use, the posture we have, those kinds of things can illustrate and reveal what our state of being is. Sensory experience, you got pain somewhere, or your stomach is upset, or your heart rate is hot. You become aware of that. If you know the neural circuitry around that, you know what part of the brain is being activated and what it needs to be righted. So if I am going through that low immobilized state and I've got a stomach ache, I know that's where I am. I'm in the dorsal vagal state. My neural circuitry in the digestive area is being activated. So what do I need to do from there? I need to mobilize. Well, how do I mobilize? Well, I just start moving. I focus on my breath. And if I want to go a little bit more toward comfort, I talk to someone or smile at someone, which smiling in and of itself can bring that activation level to a ventral vagal state. Humming or singing can do that too. Before every performance that I give now, I sing or hum in the car on the way there, because I tend to go toward dorsal vagal response when I get really nervous. So I just keep it up there in ventral. And I'm aware of my breath. I may do a practice, I may not. If I've done enough resourcing in my practice, then I can go to that resource too. And I have another set of videos that are on resourcing. Triggers has some information on resourcing. So this is what you do. You use your body, you use what you have available to you to move toward regulation. And when you're in that regulated state, you are fully present. You're accessible to flow state. You're at your very top in your potential, reaching your potential. It's the place to always be moving toward, even when we can't. It's the place we want to be aware of, that we are capable of attaining. So this is our video on regulation. If you have any questions at all, you want to reach me through Messenger, comment on this video, or visit my Facebook group site, Musical Minds. I'd be happy to talk with you. So let me know your thoughts. Thank you.